Morning mist curled above Willow Creek like breath from a sleeping giant. The cabin stood just beyond its bend, timber gray with age, roof sagging under a quilt of moss and melted frost. Smoke rose from its crooked chimney, slow and hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. Inside the world was smaller but warm. The fire crackled low, licking at birch logs Liam's heart had split before dawn. He sat at the table, mending a trap with trembling fingers, his beard silvered and his eyes thoughtful, as though he carried the hush of the woods inside him. "Wind's changing," he murmured, testing the metal spring. Across the room, June lifted her head. The girl sat by the window, eyes clouded but unstartled, her hands busy with a strip of willow bark she was weaving into a basket. The sound of the fibers scraping soothed her, a rhythm as steady as her heartbeat. "Smells like thaw," she said softly, smiling toward the sound of her father's voice. "Creek will flood again." Liam nodded, though she couldn't see it. "The snow's near gone from the north ridge. Maybe the elk will move through by week's end." He hesitated, watching her. "We'll need to check the traps before the melt turns useless." She paused, sensing the weight in his tone. "You mean you will?" He sighed. The argument had no teeth, only habit. "You could come, Junebug. Ain't far." Her fingers tightened on the bark. "I don't need to see it to know it's dangerous." Outside, the creek roared faintly, swollen with spring melt. It had been 6 years since Liam's wife drowned there. A winter night, thin ice, a lantern lost in the dark. June had been 16 then, still seeing shapes and color before the fever took her sight. Since that night, Liam kept her close, as if every sound might steal her too. He rose and crossed to her, setting his rough hand over hers. "I know you got your ways of seeing," he said gently, "but it's been a hard winter. Pelts are scarce. If we don't gather enough this spring, the merchants will pay half come summer." She tilted her head, listening. The cabin groaned in the wind. "Then I'll weave more baskets. You can trade them in town." Liam smiled, though it hurt too. "Ain't no one in town worthy of your baskets." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that lives in people who have learned not to speak too loud for fear of losing what peace they have. The firelight fluttered across June's face, softening her pale eyes. She was beautiful in that fragile, unseen way, born of patience and sound. Liam often wondered if the Lord left her sightless so she might notice the things others never could. The tremor of a bird's wings, the warmth in silence, the truth beneath pity. The day stretched thin. Liam gathered his traps and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "I'll check the ridge for noon," he said. "You keep that fire alive." June nodded. "And you come back before it dies." He smiled at her words, the same ones her mother once said to him. Then he stepped out into the raw air. The forest met him like an old friend, damp, pine-sweet, full of whispering breath. Snow still clung to the shadows, glistening like salt. Each step pressed into the earth with a faint crunch, water seeping beneath. The world was waking, restless and alive. Halfway up the ridge, Liam paused. The wind shifted, carrying a low growl that wasn't thunder. He crouched, eyes narrowing. Bears sometimes woke early after a lean winter, desperate and mean. He moved slower now, rifle ready. When he found the first trap, it was empty, rusted from the cold. The second half buried. At the third he stopped short. Blood darkened the snow, fresh and deep. The iron jaws had snapped shut on something large, but what lay tangled there was no beast. A man. He was tall even as he lay twisted, one leg caught in the trap's cruel teeth. His coat was torn, face pale under a weak stubble. The blood had frozen around the wound like black glass. For a heartbeat Liam thought him dead, until the man's hand twitched, grasping air. Liam knelt fast, prying the trap open. The metal groaned before yielding. "Easy now," he muttered, voice low. "You're caught deep." The stranger's eyes flickered open, gray-blue, wild with pain. "Bear trap," he rasped. Liam nodded. "Yours?" A faint nod. "Was set in it?" "Damn fool mistake." His voice cracked. "Thought I was tougher 'n I am." Liam studied him. The man's frame was enormous, broad-shouldered, muscles corded even in weakness. A settler, maybe, or rancher from the lowlands. "Can you move?" "No." "Then we'll move you." Liam tore strips from his own coat, binding the wound tight. When he tried to lift the man, pain wrung a guttural sound from his chest. "Easy," Liam said again, though his back screamed. The man's weight was near impossible. He looked toward the cabin, hidden beyond the trees. June. She couldn't help drag him, but she could boil water, gather clean cloth, light the fire high. He would need her courage. "Hold on, son," Liam said. "Ain't far." Each step was a prayer through mud and melting snow. The man drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling names Liam didn't know. His blood left a red trail like a ribbon across the pale ground. By the time the cabin came into view, the old trapper's arms shook with exhaustion. June heard them before she saw their shadows through the window. "Pa," she called, standing quickly. "Get the cot ready," Liam gasped, kicking the door open. "We've got a hurt man." Her breath caught. "A stranger?" "Bleeding bad." June moved without hesitation. She fetched the basin, filled it from the kettle, and spread the wool blanket smooth. Her hands found the edge of the cot by memory. When Liam lowered the man down, she knelt beside him, feeling for the wound. "He's cold," she whispered. "We need heat." "Already stoking," Liam said, throwing another log on the fire. The stranger stirred, voice slurred. "Didn't mean to trespass." "You hush," Liam muttered. "You're lucky it was us found you." June's touch was steady, tracing the torn flesh with gentle precision. "There's iron still in it," she said. "He'll fever soon." Liam met her blind eyes. "You think you can?" She nodded. "I'll try." With a trembling hand, she poured warm water over the wound, listening to the hiss of blood against metal. The man groaned. "Almost done," she murmured. "Almost." When the last fragment clinked into the basin, she pressed the cloth firm. Her hands were red, her face pale, but her voice steady. "He'll live," she said, though she couldn't see his color. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, a storm gathering somewhere beyond the ridge. Liam looked out the window, uneasy. Inside, June sat beside the wounded man, head bowed. His breathing deepened, slow and ragged but sure. Liam exhaled, sinking into the chair by the fire. "Ain't no telling who he is," he whispered to himself. June tilted her head, hearing more than his words. "Maybe the creek sent him," she said quietly. Liam frowned. "What you mean?" She smiled faintly. "It takes what it wants, but sometimes it gives something back." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and steady, as if the world itself held its breath. When Colt McGraw woke, it was not to the warmth of sunlight but to the low crackle of a fire and the scent of boiled herbs. Pain pressed through his leg in deep, slow waves, each one sharper than the last. For a moment, he thought he was back on his ranch, until the unfamiliar rasp of an old man's breathing reached him. Liam Hart sat nearby, knife in hand, whittling a strip of pine. His eyes lifted at the sound of movement. "You're awake," he said simply. Colt's throat burned. "Where am I?" "Cabin by Willow Creek." Liam's voice was calm but heavy. "You bled half the mountain dry. My daughter and I hauled you out of that trap." Colt blinked toward the window. A soft light trembled across the room. A figure moved there, slender, with long hair bound loosely at her neck. She was stirring something in a small pot. "Your daughter?" "June." Liam's tone softened, then cooled again. "Don't strain to see her. She can't see you." Colt frowned. "Can't?" "She's blind." The words fell like a stone in still water. June turned at the mention, her expression calm, almost serene. "Good morning," she said, voice light as wind. "You sound strong enough to sit." Colt tried, but pain seized him halfway up. Liam set a firm hand on his shoulder. "You'll tear what's healing." "I owe you," Colt said, wincing. "Both of you." Liam grunted. "Debt's no good out here. Just get well." June came closer, carrying a cup. Her steps were sure, each placed by memory. She held the cup out carefully until it touched Colt's hand. "It's willow bark tea. Bitter, but it'll keep the fever down." He looked at her, her pale eyes unfocused, her smile small but steady. "You brewed this." "I did." He hesitated, then drank. It was as she said, bitter, earthy, alive with warmth. He hadn't realized how cold he'd been until that moment. 4 hours, the cabin drifted between silence and sound, the fire's pop, Liam's quiet carving, June's humming under her breath. Colt tried to rest, but his mind kept circling the memory of the trap. The snap of metal, the bear's roar in the distance, the weight of failure. He'd been setting that trap to keep predators from his pasture, yet he'd been caught like one himself. By evening the fever had eased. Liam changed his bandages with practiced hands. "How long you been ranchin'?" he asked without looking up. "Since I was 20. Bought land east of here. Tried to raise cattle. Lost most to the freeze last winter." "East of here's near barren," Liam said. "So why stay?" Colt's jaw tightened. "Because it's mine." Liam gave a faint, knowing smile. "That reason near broke me once." June listened quietly from her corner, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. She could sense the weight behind both voices, the old man's guarded wisdom, the younger one's shame. She spoke softly. Land doesn't keep a man. People do. Neither answered. The words hung in the air like smoke. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the cracks in the shutters, painting gold lines across the cabin floor. June sat by Colt's cot, weaving thin cords of bark. He could hear the faint whisper of her fingers. "You always work?" he asked. "It helps me think," she said. "Or not think." "What do you make?" "Things I can trade in town. Baskets, mats, sometimes little toys." She smiled faintly. "My father says they're useless. I think they're kind." Colt studied her. She moved with a kind of grace that made blindness look like strength. "You've lived here long?" "All my life." "You don't go to town much?" Her hands stilled. "People there look at me like a ghost. It's easier not to be seen at all." He wanted to say something, but Liam came in with a pail of water, cutting the moment short. "You're healing faster than I expected," the old man said. "Might be up on that leg in a week if you don't fight me." Colt nodded, but his voice carried guilt. "Didn't mean to trouble you. Should have known better than to trap that close to the ridge." Liam shrugged. "The ridge don't forgive foolishness. But you're here now. Rest your punishment." The three of them shared a meal, salt pork, beans, and bread hard enough to break a tooth. June's laughter softened it all, a sound neither man expected. Later, while Liam stepped out to split wood, Colt watched June feel her way around the room, measuring distance by sound and touch. "You move like you can see," he said quietly. She smiled. "Maybe I can. Just not the way you do." He shifted, the words catching something inside him. He'd always thought strength was about force, not endurance. But watching her navigate the dark, he wasn't so sure anymore. That night, the wind rose outside, carrying the smell of rain. Liam barred the shutters and checked his rifle. "Storm comin'," he muttered. "You sleep light if you're smart. Wolves sometimes follow thunder." Colt lay awake long after the others had settled. Through the cracks in the roof, he watched flashes of lightning etch the beams in white. He thought of his ranch, empty pastures, debts unpaid, the letters from men who wanted his land. He'd left it behind to trap and sell what he could, but now he wondered if he'd simply been running from ghosts. A soft voice broke the quiet. "You don't sleep," June said from across the room. "Neither do you." "I hear things in storms," she whispered. "The creek changes its voice. It sounds different tonight." Colt turned his head toward her silhouette. "Different how?" "Restless. Like it's warning us." He wanted to dismiss it, but the unease in her tone rooted deep. Outside, thunder cracked close, shaking the window panes. Liam stirred, sitting upright. "Stay put," he ordered. "Something's moving near the pen." He reached for his rifle and stepped out into the rain. Colt tried to rise, but pain stopped him cold. June stood instead, feeling for the wall. "You can't," he said. "I can listen," she answered, pressing her hand to the doorframe. Moments passed, only rain, the low growl of wind. Then a sound, wood splintering, followed by Liam's shout. Colt forced himself upright, biting back a cry as his wound tore. He reached for the knife beside his cot and dragged himself toward the door. "Stay inside." Liam's voice thundered from the dark. Then silence. June froze, breath catching. Colt pushed the door open just as lightning flashed. For a heartbeat, the yard glowed silver, and he saw Liam standing over the half-broken fence, rifle raised, facing something moving in the shadows, large, low, and silent. The light vanished, swallowed by rain. Colt's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Close it," he said through his teeth. "And don't move." June turned her face toward him. "What is it?" His voice came rough and quiet. The bear wasn't alone. Outside, another growl rolled through the dark, deep, alive, and getting closer. The storm broke by dawn, leaving the valley raw and dripping. Mist coiled around the pines like smoke, and the world smelled of wet earth and iron. Liam stood outside the cabin, hat low against the drizzle, scanning the tree line for signs of the bear. He'd driven it off with warning shots, but the fence was torn and the sheep pen lay open like a wound. June waited at the door, hands clutching her shawl, listening for his boots to return. Inside, Colt sat by the fire, his face drawn but stronger, his wounded leg wrapped tight. He had insisted on helping, though every movement still sent a grimace through him. "Stay put," Liam had said before leaving. But Colt wasn't a man who could sit still while another worked. When Liam came back, mud up to his knees, he found the rancher outside splitting wood. "You'll split that leg open again," Liam snapped. Colt straightened, breath fogging in the cold air. I'll heal faster working than waiting. Liam studied him a moment, then took the axe from his hands. Reckon pride cuts deeper than that blade. June stepped forward, smiling faintly. Pa means thank you. That night, they ate in silence, stew, warm bread, the quiet drip of water from the eaves. But a new heaviness lingered in the air, something unsaid. Colt was healing too fast to stay. The ridge, the town, the world beyond the creek were calling him back. June felt it before he did, the shift in his voice, the distance between words. 3 days later, when Liam suggested they go to town for supplies, Colt offered to accompany them. I owe you both, he said. Let me at least carry what you trade for. Liam hesitated, then nodded. You can walk now, I reckon. Just keep your head low. Town folks got long memories and short kindness. June listened, her fingers stilling on the edge of the table. She hadn't been to town in months. The last time, a woman had called her cursed. Another had asked if she was one of God's mistakes. But Colt's voice, steady, calm, gave her courage. We'll go together, she said. By midday, the three of them reached the dusty main street. The town seemed carved from sunlight and judgment. A bell clanged from the church tower, wagons rattled over mud, faces turned to stare. June walked between them, her hand lightly resting on Colt's arm for direction. His stride slowed to match hers. He could feel every curious gaze like a pebble thrown at his back. At the mercantile, Liam placed a small bundle of pelts on the counter. The shopkeeper, Mr. Pike, looked over them without greeting. Late in the season, he muttered. Prices are down. They'll do, Liam said. Behind them, whispers stirred. That the blind girl from the creek? Someone murmured. Old trapper keeps her hidden, they say. Colt turned, eyes sharp. 2 women near the barrels pretended not to look. June stood very still, her face calm but pale. The whispers deepened, carried by that cruel tone the frontier used when it smelled weakness. Liam finished his trade quickly. As they turned to leave, Mrs. Branley, the preacher's wife, stepped from behind the shelves, her mouth thin as wire. Didn't think we'd see you again, Liam, she said loudly. Or your girl. Her eyes flicked to June. Still keeping her up there away from God's light? Liam froze, his jaw tightening. She's got all the light she needs. Mrs. Branley smiled without warmth. Ain't natural, a young woman never walking proper among folks. Folks start to wonder what sins a man hides up in them hills. Colt's voice cut through the room like a blade. Ma'am, he said, slow and steady, you'd best wonder about your own before speaking of another's. Silence fell. Even the old clock behind the counter seemed to stop ticking. Pike's eyes widened, but he said nothing. Mrs. Branley's face flushed dark. And who might you be, mister? Someone who owes his life to them, Colt said. And I'd trade 10 towns like this for half their decency. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of it filled the room until no one dared breathe. Then he turned, offered his arm to June again, and led her out into the open air. Outside, the wind had shifted. Spring warmth was breaking through. June walked in silence, her fingers trembling slightly on his sleeve. They hate what they don't understand, she said quietly. They're blind in their own way, Colt replied. Liam walked behind them, his steps heavy but proud. For years he had avoided town to protect her. Now he realized protection wasn't the same as freedom. They loaded supplies onto the wagon and started back toward the ridge. The sun dropped low, spilling gold over the prairie. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of something new. At the creek crossing, the wagon stuck in the mud. Liam cursed under his breath. Colt jumped down despite his healing leg, pushing against the wheel until it groaned free. Mud splashed his coat, and June laughed softly, the first sound of joy since they'd left home. He turned toward her, grinning, and for a fleeting second, the world felt right. When they reached the cabin, dusk was falling. Liam stowed the supplies, but his thoughts were far away. That woman's words had cut deep. He'd built a life of quiet dignity out here, far from judgment, yet the past had followed him like a shadow. Colt stood at the door, watching June by the fire. She was sorting herbs by touch, her lips moving silently as she counted the leaves. Her hair glowed in the firelight, and for a moment she seemed made of that same warm light she couldn't see. He stepped closer. You shouldn't have to hide from anyone, he said softly. She smiled faintly. It's easier when you don't see their faces. Doesn't make it right. She turned her head toward his voice. And what would you do about it, Mr. McGraw? He hesitated. I'd build a place where no one dared pity you. The words came out rougher than he meant, but she seemed to understand. Then you'd have to build it far away, she said gently. People always find something to pity. Liam looked up from his chair, his gaze moving between them. He could feel something stirring, something fragile and dangerous like hope after loss. Night settled in thick and quiet. They ate by lantern light, the air scented with pine smoke and stew. Outside, the frogs had begun to sing. Liam leaned back, listening. "You two ever hear the way sound carries after rain?" he asked softly. "Feels like the earth remembers everything." June tilted her head, smiling. "Then it remembers kindness too." Colt met her smile with a slow nod. He hadn't expected to find peace here, not after all the failures and debts he'd left behind. Yet here it was, in a blind girl's quiet courage and an old man's stubborn heart. When the fire dimmed, Liam spoke again, his voice low. "We'll need to mend the fence at first light. Bear's mate might circle back." Colt nodded, eyes on the flame. "Then I'll be ready." June listened to their voices, one worn by time, the other still uncertain, and felt something rise inside her that she didn't yet have a name for. Outside, the wind shifted once more, carrying the scent of thawing earth and something distant. Footsteps, maybe, or memory. She couldn't tell which. But she whispered all the same, her words barely a breath. "Sometimes the dark gives us what the light never could." Neither man heard her, but the fire cracked softly as if it did, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a low growl answered from the trees. The morning began quiet, too quiet for spring. The wind had gone still, and even the creek seemed to whisper instead of sing. Liam's heart rose early as he always did, though the stiffness in his joints felt sharper that day. He fed the fire, ground the last of the coffee beans, and stood for a while staring out at the pale line of dawn spreading above the ridge. The storm had washed the air clean, but there was a heaviness beneath it, like the hush before a confession. Inside, June moved carefully through the room, her fingers tracing familiar edges. The table, the shelf, the chipped porcelain cup. She sensed her father's unease the way she sensed the change in wind. "Something's wrong," she said softly. Liam turned. "Just the quiet playing tricks." But she tilted her head, listening. No birds. He followed her gaze toward the window. She was right. Not a single crow or jay called from the trees. Even the squirrels were absent. The silence made the cabin feel like a held breath. Colt came in from outside, carrying an armful of logs. His coat was open, hair damp with sweat despite the chill. "Tracks by the pen," he said. "Fresh. Big ones." Liam frowned. "Bear? Too big for one. Maybe two." June's hand went to her throat. "The mate?" Colt nodded grimly. "Could be." The three of them moved with quiet purpose after that, boarding the windows, checking the rifles, setting lanterns near the door. The cabin was sturdy but old, built for storms, not beasts. Liam could feel his heart knocking like a trapped bird. "If they come near, we light the fire high," he said. "Bears don't take kindly to flame." June stood beside the hearth, her expression calm though her fingers trembled. "We killed one," she whispered. "The woods remember blood." Colt looked at her, those sightless eyes that somehow saw deeper than most men ever could. "Then we'll make 'em remember mercy too." Hours passed. The sun climbed and fell again, hidden behind a thin veil of cloud. The air thickened with damp cold. Liam busied himself mending a snare that didn't need mending. Colt sharpened his knife until the sound grated. June sat by the window, listening to the rhythm of their movements like a prayer she couldn't quite trust. When twilight came, the forest began to breathe again, but not with birdsong. The wind carried low rustles, heavy steps in the underbrush, the sound of branches cracking under weight. Liam reached for his rifle. "They're close." Colt moved to the door. "Stay behind me." June stood. "No," her voice was soft but steady. "You can't see in the dark any better than I can. Let me listen." Liam turned sharply. "June." But she was already stepping toward the wall, pressing her ear against the wood. The night was alive out there, breathing, shifting, circling. She could hear the scrape of claws, the low huff of an animal testing the air. "Two," she said. "One near the pen, one by the creek." Colt exchanged a look with Liam. "She's right. I'll take the one near the pen." Liam caught his arm. "You ain't ready for fightin'. Don't matter." Colt's eyes burned steady. "They come here, they'll tear through everything." The old man hesitated, then handed him the lantern. "Keep the light low. They spook easy." Colt nodded, took the rifle, and stepped out into the dark. Rain began again, thin and cold, pattering against the roof like whispered warnings. June stood motionless, listening to the receding crunch of Colt's boots. He shouldn't go alone. Liam checked the second rifle. "No man ever should," he muttered and followed him out. The forest swallowed them both within moments. June waited by the fire, her palms pressed together, whispering prayers she couldn't remember the words to. Outside, the lanterns flickered faintly through the mist. Time stretched thin. Then came a sound, a gunshot sharp and close. Then another. And then a roar deep and terrible that made the window glass shiver. June's knees weakened, but she didn't move from the hearth. She listened, straining for any sound that wasn't the storm. Her father's shout came next, faint but fierce. Then silence again. Something thudded against the door. Her breath caught. The sound came once more, a heavy scrape, then a low growl. She reached for the poker by the fire, gripping it like a weapon. The door shuddered. Another blow followed, harder this time. "Pa," she whispered. No answer. She took one step forward, then another, her hand finding the latch. The smell of wet fur drifted through the cracks. Her body trembled, but she didn't turn away. She raised the poker high, just as the door burst inward. A shadow filled the frame, huge and staggering. For a heartbeat, her mind failed to understand it. Then she heard it, a man's voice, hoarse and weak. "June, it's me." She dropped the poker, rushing forward. Colt collapsed half inside, half out, his coat torn open, blood dark across his chest. She dragged him in with all the strength she had, kicking the door shut behind him. "Where's Pa?" she cried. "Still by the creek," Colt gasped. "Bear hit him." June's heart stuttered. She pressed the cloth to his wound, but he pushed her hand away. "Go. He's still fightin'. I can't see." "Then listen." She hesitated only a breath, then snatched a lantern and stepped out into the storm. The wind tore at her shawl. The rain had turned to sleet, silver threads hissing in the dark. She followed the sound, the gunfire, the roars, the crashes of branches breaking. Her boots sank deep into mud. Every sound was her guide, the growl of the bear, the sharp snap of wood, the ragged breath of her father. When she found him, the scene looked carved from nightmare. Liam stood waist-deep in the creek, rifle broken, the great bear lunging toward him. Its fur gleamed black with rain and blood. He stumbled, fell backward, water swallowing his cry. June didn't think, she only moved. She swung the lantern wide, flame flaring bright against the storm. The bear turned, snarling. She threw the lantern into the water between them. It burst in a blossom of fire and oil, flames racing across the creek like gold lightning. The beast reared, roaring in fury. Liam crawled toward the bank. "Run, June." But she didn't. She found a fallen branch, heavy as a club, and swung as the bear charged. The wood cracked against its skull. The blow barely slowed it, but it was enough. From behind, a shot thundered, Colt's rifle, fired through pain and grit. The bear convulsed, roared once more, then fell into the burning water. For a long time none of them moved. The flames hissed out, leaving only smoke and rain. Liam lay gasping on the shore. Colt limped toward them, rifle still smoking. June knelt beside her father, feeling for his pulse. "Pa, please?" He coughed, eyes fluttering open. "I'm here, Junebug." She let out a sob, clutching his hand. Colt sank to his knees beside them, face pale. "It's done," he said softly. Liam looked at him through the dim light, his expression full of something fierce and unspoken. "You saved us," he whispered. "A man's got no greater calling." Colt shook his head. "You saved me first." They stayed there until the rain softened into mist. When they finally rose, the dawn was bleeding through the trees, a pale, trembling light that made the world look new. They walked back slowly, Liam leaning on Colt's shoulder, June guiding them by sound. The forest, once full of threat, now seemed hushed in reverence. At the cabin they collapsed by the fire. June cleaned their wounds, her hands steady despite exhaustion. Colt watched her move, every gesture filled with quiet grace. "You shouldn't have come after us," he said. She smiled faintly. "You both keep forgetting, I don't need eyes to see where love stands." The room fell silent again, save for the soft hiss of rain. Liam stared into the fire, voice low. "The woods took blood today," he said. "But they gave something back." "What's that?" Colt asked. The old man's gaze drifted toward June. "Family." Outside, the creek ran dark but calm, carrying ashes and memory toward the valley below. And far beyond the ridge, unseen through the fog, another shadow moved, slow, heavy, deliberate, as if answering the forest's call. Spring settled gently over Willow Creek, the kind of spring that felt like forgiveness. The snow had long since melted, revealing green shoots where blood once stained the earth. The bear's carcass was gone, carried off by scavengers and rain, yet its presence lingered, an invisible ghost woven into the hush of the woods. In its place, life had returned. Birds called again from the pines, timid at first, then confident, as though the forest itself was breathing easier. Inside the cabin, everything smelled of new beginnings: pine smoke, bread baking, clean linen drying by the hearth. June moved gracefully through the small space, cane in hand, her steps sure and measured. Though she had not slept soundly since the night of the attack, her spirit carried a new steadiness. Each sound in the world had grown sharper: the whisper of the creek of her father's chair, the quiet rhythm of Colt's boots outside. Liam sat by the window, leg bandaged, whittling in the morning light. His once stooped shoulders now seemed lighter. "You hear that?" he said. June paused. "The birds?" He smiled. Took him weeks to come back. Reckon even they had to see if Mercy still lived here." She laughed softly. "Maybe they just missed our singing." Outside, Colt McGraw worked along the fence line, hammering new boards into place. The wound in his chest had healed into a long, pale scar that tugged when he breathed, but it didn't stop him. He moved slower than before, deliberate, as if each strike of the hammer was an act of thanks. When June came to the door, the sound of her cane tapping against the threshold made him turn. "You're walking better?" he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm listening better," she replied. "Every step sounds different now, the ground, the air. Even your voice." He smiled faintly. "And what's mine sound like?" "Like someone trying not to care too much," she said. That made him laugh, a sound rough and honest. Maybe that's true. For a while they worked together. She stood nearby, handing him nails and measuring wood by touch. When her hand brushed his, neither moved away. It was not romance in the foolish, spoken sense, but something deeper, like the warmth of sunlight through closed eyelids. By noon, clouds gathered again over the ridge, their bellies dark with rain. Liam called them in for supper. They ate quietly, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the wind beginning to stir. Liam leaned back in his chair, studying Colt. "You fixin' to move on?" Colt hesitated. "I thought I might help mend the roof before I do." June turned her face toward him. "And after that?" He looked down at his hands. "I ain't rightly sure where after that is." "You could stay," Liam said, voice low. "This cabin's held 3 before. Wouldn't mind again." Colt looked up, startled by the invitation. "You don't owe me. Owing's got nothing to do with it. You belong here same as the rest of us. Maybe the woods sent you." June reached across the table, her fingers brushing the rough edge of Colt's sleeve. "You gave us light when we'd forgotten how to look for it." He swallowed hard, unable to speak. The wind howled through the chimney like a sigh. That evening the rain came fast, drumming the roof like a heartbeat. Thunder rolled over the ridge, but no one flinched. The storm was gentler this time, its song more familiar than frightening. June sat near the fire, her head resting against the wall, listening to the rain. "It sounds like it's washing everything clean," she said. Colt glanced toward her, the glow from the hearth painting her face in soft gold. "Maybe it is." Liam rose slowly, setting his carving aside. "I'll check the traps by the creek come morning," he said, limping toward his bed. "You two get some rest." When he was gone, the cabin grew quiet but not lonely. The rain whispered steady on the roof, and June lifted her face toward it as though she could see the sky through the boards. "When I lost my sight," she said softly, "I thought the world was done showing me beauty. But lately I've been seeing more than before." Colt leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What do you see now?" "Kindness," she said. "It sounds like your footsteps when you come up the porch. It feels like my father's hand on mine when he prays. It smells like rain before dawn. I think that's the kind of light no storm can take." He watched her, the words settling into him like roots finding soil. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known," he said quietly. She smiled, tilting her head. "Then maybe you've been looking at the wrong kind of strength." Lightning flashed, painting the room white for an instant. Colt stood, crossed to the window, and stared out into the storm. "You think the woods ever forget?" he asked. June turned toward him. "Forget what?" "The blood. The fear. The way it took before it gave back." She shook her head. "Maybe it doesn't forget. Maybe it forgives." The storm raged on. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Colt turned back to her, his voice rough but tender. "When this rain passes, I'll ride into town. I'll sell what I can, buy new seed, bring it back here. I figure this land's got room for something to grow again." June's lips curved into a faint smile. "You'll come back." He nodded. "If you'll let me." Her face softened. "Then I'll wait. The creek always tells me when someone's coming." A flash of thunder made her flinch slightly, and he crossed to her without thinking. His hand brushed her shoulder, then stilled. She reached up, fingers finding his wrist, holding it there. The contact was small, but it felt like an oath. "You don't have to see light," he whispered, "to be it." Her answer came like a breath. "Then don't leave it behind." "You didn't?" When the storm finally eased, the night air smelled of wet pine and new beginnings. Liam snored softly in the other room. June sat by the dying fire, her head resting against Colt's arm. The lantern burned low, haloing them in amber. Outside, the forest shimmered under the moon, its scars softened by silver light. Colt looked at her, at the serenity on her face, at the small smile that seemed to belong to the quiet itself. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think the dark meant the end of things. Now I reckon it just means the light's learnin' to be patient." June turned her face toward him, eyes still clouded but luminous. "That's all light ever does," she said. "Waits to be found." The fire gave one last crack before fading to embers. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a place of hiding, it felt like home. When dawn came, it arrived gently. The rain had gone, leaving mist curling along the creek. Liam rose to find Colt already outside, splitting wood, shirt sleeves rolled, hair damp with dew. June stood at the porch, cane tapping softly against the rail. She lifted her face toward the sound of him and smiled. "You're up early," she said. He turned, grinning. "Couldn't sleep. Too much worth waking up to." Liam watched them from the doorway, the light of morning catching on his knife as he carved a new piece of wood, a lantern, simple and plain. "This one's for you, Junebug," he said. "So you can remember that light ain't something you lose. It's something you carry." She reached for it, running her fingers over the smooth grain. "Then I'll keep it close." Colt looked at her, something fierce and hopeful stirring behind his eyes. "Maybe one day," he said softly, "we'll build you a window facing the sun." She smiled, tears glinting like dew. "I can already feel it." The creek murmured nearby, and a warm breeze swept through the valley, carrying the scent of earth and rebirth. And as the three of them stood there, old, blind, and healed, the forest around them seemed to sigh in relief as though it, too, could finally see the light they had made for one another.